I'm going to put a link to this. This is a bootleg that's been floating around the internet, and somebody tore it down. I've watched the whole thing, and I downloaded the whole thing because when I saw it, I said, "This is going to be somebody's going to delete this." And Mark Douglas's wife is still alive, so maybe, or his estate is tearing the stuff down off the internet, some copyright thing. But here's an excerpt from one of his. I don't know when this was recorded, but this is just psychological gold to me. I could listen to this on a loop. In fact, this seminar goes on for 2 days. This is part 7 of 2, and this guy here somehow got a hold of. But this excerpt right here, where he speaks about, I just love this guy to death. And this guy's dead, so it's a real heartbreaker.
Only the very best traders truly accept the risk. Now think about what I just said. Accept the risk. The key word is accept. What does it mean to accept something? Now when you think about what it means to accept something, it means to be completely reconciled, to be at peace, where there's no internal argument. Most traders like to think of themselves as risk takers because they're involved in an endeavor that's inherently risky. And so therefore, they think of themselves as someone who takes risks. But the reality is that most traders are doing everything possible to avoid the risk of trading. And how do we know that to be a fact? I know that to be an absolute, undisputable fact. Because most traders still make the mistake of not predefining the risk of putting on a trade. What's the connection? To predefine your risk of putting on a trade, you have to gather evidence for why the trade might not work. Most traders don't put on a trade until they've convinced themselves 100% that the trade's a winner. Why would I put this trade on if I didn't think it was going to be a winner? Right? To predefine my risk, I have to start gathering evidence that it might not work, or why it might not work. And in the process of gathering that evidence, I might talk myself out of the trade. Right? Now see, someone who's thinking in probabilities, that wouldn't even occur to them to think this way, but we'll get into that in a second, okay? So if I gather too much evidence, I'll talk myself out of the trade, and many times it feels worse to not have put on a trade that ultimately ends up being a winner, as opposed to putting on a trade that ended up being a loser. And so to get around that whole, to get around that let's say that whole rationalization, what we do is basically just convince ourselves that I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I was right. And so therefore, there really is no risk, or I wouldn't be putting on the trade in the first place. Now that's easy to do, and this is what I'm talking about, like when I say that there's two inherent problems, is that our minds are wired to avoid pain, and our minds are also wired to associate. We've got some real problems here that we have to get around and compensate for. Because what is my mind going to associate with putting on, with let's say a losing trade or being wrong? All of us grow up learning to be wrong in very painful ways. I don't think there's anyone in this room or anybody that I've met that hasn't grown up learning about what it means to be wrong and learning it in ways that isn't inherently painful, both physically and emotionally. Now, if I have the tendency to associate a losing trade with what it means to be wrong, basically what happens is that losing trade taps me into the accumulated pain of every time I've been wrong in my life. It isn't just a trade. It isn't just one in a sequence.
Or all the losing trades you've ever had.
Yeah, exactly. Or all the losing trades I've ever had. Or anything that I've ever lost in my life. And that could be vast, I mean, in terms of the implications. Losing loved ones, losing pets, all kinds of things like that. So if these things aren't reconciled, meaning we're not at peace with it, then they definitely have a way of filtering right into our trading until we learn how to truly think in probabilities. And then what we've done is put trading into a completely different category in our mind that takes it out of a right or wrong category and takes it out of even a loss category, because losses just become a part of the cost of doing business. Where are we in this? Okay. Oh, you know what? Let's just take a little break then. Yeah, this is good. This is fine. Exist in every time frame. In other words, you can take the same patterns that exist on a daily chart, and you'll see them on an hourly chart, you'll see them on a 10-minute chart, you'll see them on a 5-minute chart, you'll see them on a 2-minute chart. Now what this does is it turns the market into this never-ending stream of opportunities to enrich ourselves. But like I said before, patterns imply consistency. And based on the way our minds are wired, this becomes a real problem. And this is what we have to overcome. We have to overcome this inherent natural tendency to associate what's happening in this now moment with something that's already in our mind as a memory about some previous moment, because the two do not have a relationship. Because again, the patterns at the macro level, just like that's how casinos make money. Casinos make money because they know that based on the rules of the game, the odds are eventually in their favor, meaning that you can take a bell curve, typical bell curve, which would represent extreme winners, extreme losers, and everyone in between. But the bottom line is, based on the rules of the game, over a large enough sample size of hands played, of dice thrown, or spins of the wheel on the roulette, that they will come out net winners by X percentage. And each of them is different. Now, the problem is, how do we train our minds to think like a casino? Because essentially it's the same thing. When these patterns roll around, our minds have the tendency to assume that what happened the last time will happen again this time, when the reality is there's a random outcome. And how do we know there's a random outcome? Even though the pattern exists and we see it, and like I said, the same variables can define it, and they can be exactly the same from one occurrence to the next. You can have the exact same mathematics, the exact same measurements. It can look exactly the same. But the problem from the market's perspective is that each pattern is made up of what? Different traders. Or some of the same traders. It could be some of the same. But the point is that in every case, there are always going to be different traders. And as a result, each of these traders has different expectations about what's going to happen in the future, compelling them to either step up and bid, or accept a bid, or step up and offer, or accept an offer in a way or at a price that they might not have done the last time around. And so as a result of the way our minds are wired, I'm going to do it. So we can take these up and down ticks, okay, that form into patterns. Get a nice symmetrical trading range going here, okay? This is support, this is resistance. Now, all this really means, when the market came up to this point right here, what really happened? But just at a very simple, fundamental level, what happened? Yeah, it doesn't have to be exactly more people in terms of sellers, but at least there was more selling volume, enough volume to absorb all the buy orders with enough left over to cause this to happen, right? In this particular time frame, whatever that is. This could be any time frame chart, by the way. It wouldn't make any difference, right? Okay? And so we've got, so what happened? The exact same thing happened here, only the opposite. enough buy orders to absorb all the selling, with enough left over for the market to do this. Now, when the market came down to this point again, we have what's called an edge, right? Right, we got an edge. If you trade support and resistance, that's an edge. An edge is a higher probability of one thing happening over another. Do we know what's going to happen in this case? Do we know that the market's going to stop here and go up? And why do we know that? Why do we know that we don't know? Okay, but why do we know that we don't know? Based in the context that we're talking about right here. Okay, but why do we know that we don't know? Yeah, we don't know if the same guys are here. That were the same people that bought here. Are they in the market? They could be out to lunch.
Or what mood
Right?
they're in.
What? Or what mood they're in, right? Exactly. We don't know. And in essence, it really only takes one trader somewhere in the world to negate the positive outcome of your edge, whatever it is. Now think about that. It only takes one trader somewhere in the world to negate the positive outcome of your edge. Just one. So in essence, when we say, well, we're going to define the risk of this trade, well, what is the risk? Okay? We don't even, we don't have a scale here in terms of dollar value, but we can say that how much distance, how much room am I going to get to let this price move against my position if I'm a buyer right here to tell me that whoever we're buying here are either in, or they're either going to come in or not come into the market. That's basically all I'm really saying. And that could be what we call an educated guess. E-D-G-E, edge, E-D-G dash U dash cated, educated guess. That's all it is, a guess. However, let's say, for an example, we're operating out of the typical mindset of the typical trader. And the typical mindset of the typical trader, he's operating out of four basic fears. The fear of being wrong, the fear of losing money, the fear of missing out, and the fear of leaving money on the table. Now, what's going to happen in this case? First of all, the market's coming down to what he defines as an edge. Is he going to put this trade on even? Is he even going to get it on? There could be all kinds of factors that would come into play that he may not even get this trade on. But let's say he works through whatever fears or hesitations, or he convinces, it doesn't work through. I'm going to take that back and say, let's just say that he convinces himself that this trade is going to work. Because basically, that's the only way he's going to get it on in the first place. And if he's convinced that this trade is going to work, it's unlikely that he will predefine his risk. Basically, just go through the same kind of thought pattern that we just went through to say, hey, look, it only takes one trader somewhere in the world to negate the positive outcome of my edge. Therefore, how much room am I going to give the market, against my position if I take this trade right here to tell me that people are either going to come in and buy it and support this price or they're not? He doesn't do that. So he gets into this trade, and the market does something like this. Now, one thing I haven't said that you're going to have to keep in mind for tomorrow and Sunday is that, remember I said that our minds are wired to avoid pain. This is a natural way that our minds function. There are two kinds of pain, physical pain and emotional pain. Physical pain we talked about, okay? Hit somebody, come into contact with the environment in some way, and our physiology will cause us to experience pain. Emotional pain is different. It's information-based pain. Information can cause us to tap into something that's inside of our mind that is made up of, let's say, negatively charged energy, and put us into a negatively charged state of mind, or fear. And what is fear? Fear is just telling us that there's something out there that we need to avoid. Okay? Our mind has automatic pain avoidance mechanisms. So for an example, if I set my hand on this table, it turned out to be a hot burner, I don't have to think about moving my hand. It happens automatically, subconsciously, There's no argument, there's no internal conflict, my hand comes off. The same kind of mechanisms exist for information. In other words, our minds can cause us to experience information in ways that are very different than what was intended from the environment's perspective, based on what we might be afraid of. It can actually distort and alter that information in ways that are consistent with keeping us out of pain. So for example, everyone in this room has learned enough about the nature of the market to say that you can recognize a trend, can you not? Is that a distinction that you've learned about the nature of the way markets can move? That the markets can trend? And we're going to define a trend as simply a series of higher highs and higher lows, or lower lows and lower highs in whatever time frame we want, right? Okay? And one thing we've also noticed about a trend is that once a trend starts, it can keep on going, right? In other words, we can assume that, once momentum gathers on one side of the market or the other, in other words, one side gets the advantage, one side has a stronger conviction about their belief in the future than the people that are taking the other side of the trade, that trend will continue until people's conviction changes. It's that simple. Okay? And a trend is an easy way to make money, right? Catch a trend, and that's an easy way to enrich ourselves, right? Okay. So, now, if I'm operating out of a fear of being wrong, and my mind is wired to avoid pain, now think about this. My mind is wired to avoid pain. The up and down ticks that the market's giving me will take on a certain quality in relationship to what's going on inside my mind. From the market's perspective, these are just up and down ticks forming into patterns that represent opportunities. I'm going to say that again. From the market's perspective, these are just up and down ticks forming into patterns that represent opportunities to enrich ourselves. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to interpret it that way. So if I'm operating out of a fear of being wrong, the principle that I'm going to give you right now is that the principle that you're going to learn about is that fear causes us to focus on the object of our fear so that we end up creating the very experience we're trying to avoid. Do I need to say that again? Fear causes us to narrow our focus of attention, put it this way. Fear causes us to narrow our focus of attention onto the object of our fear so that we end up creating the very experience we're trying to avoid. So if I'm operating out of a fear of being wrong, and the market's giving me upticks and giving me downticks, what ticks am I likely to focus my attention on and put greater significance on? The upticks. You say it louder. The upticks, right? Why? Because the upticks take me out of my pain. So for example, if I'm getting one uptick in relationship to the downtick, one uptick for every 4 or 5 downticks, the market is in a downtrend, but what I'm going to do is my mind is automatically going to narrow my focus of attention so that I place an inordinate amount of significance on that information and categorically ignoring or either ignoring or placing a lack of significance on this information right here. Because this information is being defined and interpreted as threatening because it's going to cause me to tap into my fear of being wrong, meaning I have to admit that I'm wrong, which in many cases might tap us into the accumulated emotional pain of every time I've been wrong in my life. And so therefore, this takes on an enormous amount of significance. And so what I do is I categorically ignore this information in relationship to this information because every time I get these upticks, it feels like relief to me. And I can say, well, it's finally all over. It's coming back in my direction. Now, this isn't the only fear this trader is going to be operating out of. He's also going to be operating out of a fear of losing money. But that fear is going to be sort of in the back of his mind and coming to the forefront the more the market moves against him. In other words, the more the market moves against him, the more he has to acknowledge the fact that he is losing money. And there will come a point at which there's a relative balance in this trader's mind in terms of these two energies. Now think about this. Think about this in terms of physics. There will come a point at which there's a relative balance or then a tipping of an imbalance, let's say, between what is more painful, admitting that he's wrong or losing one more dollar. What hurts more? At some point, and everyone is different, you see. For every trader is different. At some point, that point will be reached in which losing one more dollar will be 1 degree more painful than admitting that he's wrong. That's the way I'd like to say it. 1 degree more painful than admitting that he's wrong, and that's the point at which he'll get out of that trade.
Yeah, some of the losers you add, when they add to the losers, is that just another affirmation that you're right again?
Well, yeah, put it this way. You couldn't add to a loser. You're John, right?
Yes.
Okay, John, you couldn't add to a loser unless you're convinced, correct? You have to be. You couldn't take that action. And the problem is sometimes you're going to do it and it'll work. And hopefully that will never happen, because if you do it again and it works, and I mean, if you do it again and it doesn't work, it could be a catastrophic loss. That's why, in the way that, in over the years when I've worked with traders, especially floor traders, there are very few people that I've worked with that are nimble enough to add to a losing position. When I say nimble enough, I mean nimble enough mentally to be able to add to, or not add to a losing position, but add even to a winning position. I'm not saying there aren't some people who can't do it, but it's rare. It's a rare person who can do it. Because you add to a winning position and you literally have to be, unless it's part of a money management regimen that's objective, put it this way, that there's an objective money management regimen there. For most people, it isn't. They add to a winning position because they're convinced it increases their average price, which means that the smaller the distance the market has to go against them to put them into a losing trade. And they end up not with any profits at all, and usually a catastrophic loss. Whereas what we're going to do on Sunday is you're going to see how important it is to actually scale out of your winners. Instead of adding to your winners, you're taking away from your winners.
So that's this is my favorite guy. Another thing here is that if you have strategies for not being right, which is what I'm talking about when I talk about volatility breakouts, bracketing the market, and not just letting the market do what it does. Okay? Those are opportunities that exist. Low ATR, low true range, small volatility breakout. Let the market decide. But everything you see on the internet is all dialed in to, I can predict the market. This is why I got in the fight with this guy. Oh, you mean you can't predict the market? I'm super accurate. I'm using level OT8 data, which I go to investigate now. There's no stops. There's no market orders showing up in there. You can't tell if Bill Gates has a fucking pending stop. You can only see limits. That's his edge, okay? So he may be making money in the T-notes all day long. But why would he say, you're just making pennies and stuff? If you didn't think it would add up here to just keep adding to in small increments, it's like a leaky faucet. People think, leaky faucet, right? That adds up to quite a bit of water on your bill. My buddy is a computer programmer. He make like $200,000 a year. I went to his house, hit a leaky faucet. I think he's just, he's like, fuck that. I'm too busy making money. I can't even. It must have been at the end of the year. How many gallons? This went on for 2 years. He had a leaky faucet, right? Just dripping. And I thought, that's a lot of water. It's like the monkey that peed in the cash register. It all runs into money. So, anyways, this is out. I'm going to put the link to the guy that posted all this stuff. And he's got almost every part of this. This is part 2 of 7. But there's a lot to chew on here because we're human beings. And if you think you're going to write an algorithm that's going to trade better than you, your algorithm's written by human beings. Your fears, trust me, all the scripts I wrote, when I went to script trading, I really started to have problems because I'd taken my fears and wrote them into the scripts. Okay, so algorithmic trading, unless it's a true objective, like this guy was talking about, that he's got a 40 core Xenon $5,000 rack mount server that's scanning for probabilities like a casino. Okay, so this guy that's afraid of paying the spread. Trading's a business. Okay, so hope that helps predefine your risk. Right? Then you can trade carefree. You have no issues. You have no fears. And you are just, in a way, putting yourself at the mercy of the market. Trading's not always good for control freaks.